Pbis project. This is our first chat of the new school year, so welcome. Thank you guys for attending today. We are going to be getting started with a chat about our new coaching survey. So this should be a really interesting new tool that you guys can use. And telling you about this today are Brooke Curtis and Kat Rollerson from our team. So I will let them go ahead and get started.
Okay, welcome everybody. We're glad to have everyone that was able to join us today. And as Betsy said, we are going to be walking through a little bit about the role of the team and the skills you need as a Pbis leadership team, and then connect that pretty quickly to a tool we have that can help you assess strengths and needs of your team. And this is, of course, part of our roadmap to model schools, because you'll see the objectives coming up here. We're going to, like I said, set the stage with what is the purpose of our coaching Pbis team. And we always refer to you all as a coaching team. What's your role within success with Pbis implementation? We're going to talk a little bit about what we know is important in our coaching support structures by our framework. And then move into our survey tool that Betsy was mentioning that can help teams. Another tool or diagnostic type of tool where I can look at strengths I have in team capacity to do that role and areas of need I might have. And then Brooke will wrap us up with probably the most important part, a little case study or example of how that was used, that tool to inform various needs and link to various resources for a school team. So that's the frame for today. I did want to at least introduce myself and say hello to you. If I don't know you already, I am Kat. I'm going to start us off with that. We're going to start with that quick review of what do we mean by the Pbis coaching team? What's your responsibilities to be successful in Pbis implementation, and what kinds of activities? What does that look like? So we're going to start with that, then unpack those skill sets to serve that role, followed by the tool with that case example of how it can help you out. But before we do that, just a quick chat box question. If you are a DC, that's okay. Or if you're a school team representative, we're just curious, how long has it been since your last tier 1 school-wide Pbis training? Maybe it was a booster, maybe it was the initial training, but how long has it been? A year, 2 years? You can guesstimate 6 months. How long has it been since you last participated in a tier 1 school-wide Pbis training? Christy Gomez, 6 days, starting us off strong. I love it. That was pretty recent, Christy. Nice. Anyone else on the chat? How long has it been since you were participating? And if you haven't, maybe you haven't participated in a tier 1 training. That sometimes happened too. Thank you, Aaron. I see this summer. So also pretty recent. Nice. Anyone else on the call as far as when you participated in your last tier 1 training? Christy and Aaron, I appreciate the participation. Thank you. I just was curious because what we see a lot is now, not like Christy's example of 6 days or even Aaron, yours of this summer, but we see a lot of teams who maybe went through initial training and maybe that was 5-6 years ago. And there's been a lot of times since we had that initial training that does talk a lot about what the role of the coaching team is. So that's why I wanted to review the role of that team first, set the stage with what does it look like to do ongoing coaching for Pbis implementation. And that falls on that leadership team that goes through initial training with us or ongoing booster trainings and is supported and has ongoing coaching from the DC who we support. So as far as what it looks like, the coaching role is, of course, not a one-stop shop. We know that from lots of professional development research. We're not going to just do one training and be successful. We have to go through that training and then do ongoing coaching in that job environment in the schools to show that we can do that practice of the strategies that we develop and become fluent and successful at them. So what that really means simplistically is there's 3 big buckets or domains of our role. You're constantly leading and communicating. What's our Pbis implementation look like? What are some of those core features? How are the strategies that are taught to you in tier 1 initial training? How are they used and what do they look like on your campus or for DCs at the district level, what that looks like for school campuses? Constantly communicating about what strategies we might need to use to overcome certain areas of need in our data. For example, if we're seeing some subgroups not responding as well to others, or if we're seeing that we're having good fidelity with teaching and reinforcement, but not such good fidelity with our discipline continuum of response going from least to most intense, for example. But that open communication, using those good leadership skills to be really transparent in what we communicate and how we share data, goes right into the second domain, that continuous improvement focus. And I love continuous improvement in my whole career. Like, I've been in jobs that it's either individual student continuous improvement or systemic. Some people I know are not a huge fan because it feels a little exhausting at times, but this piece of we're always trying to make our implementation better. So whether you just started this school year or you've been doing it for 5-10 years, we're always in the team serving that role of using data to drive decision-making to make our implementation better or maintain those things that are successful. And we do that through goal setting and using data. And we'll talk a little bit about that in skill sets of the team. And then last, which they all connect, they're not separate, but the last one being just that ongoing coaching, just general pieces of if we lead and communicate and use good transparency in our language about what we're doing, why we're doing it, our mission, vision. And then we really coach through and are transparent about always using data to make it better, including our stakeholder feedback as part of that data. That's the continual process of engaging everyone, all our stakeholders on campus to improve. So let's go through each one a little bit. I'm going to go through this part pretty quickly, but just a little more example of what this looks like for coaching responsibilities of the entire Pbis team that we serve on a campus to do this well. So when we lead and communicate, what does that look like? And I mentioned a couple examples on the last slide, but here's a couple more for you. We have you do some activities in initial training, and I know it's a focus of kind of ongoing coaching and support from the district level. What is the vision, mission of the team? Why do they exist? What are we doing Pbis for on that campus? I mentioned the last one, what does it look like? So things like if we teach, we define, and then we, as a school team, we define and teach our expectations and rules. We come back to that concept with whatever language is familiar on our school campus pretty regularly. And then we also take the input of our stakeholders and bring it back. So leading and communication is always bi-directional in best practice. So if we know an essential feature of changing systems like schools or districts is that transparent communication and keeping our eye on the vision mission, that's the most essential features of what we're leading and communicating in this work. So there are a couple examples listed for you there. I'm curious if there are other thoughts from those of you, whether you are a district person or a school, on other things. What else might include in this category that you constantly are leading and communicating as a either district team member or a school team member? And you can just throw them in the chat box for me if you think of other things that you kind of find yourself. For example, I didn't mention number 7, but for districts and schools, but I know at district level, especially the funding supports to support is one that we're constantly having to revisit and communicate in continuous improvement. Okay, I didn't see any other ideas. If you do think of others that are included, that's just a starter list. It's by no means exhaustive. That next bucket or domain of our role and responsibilities, continuous improvement, constantly trying to monitor the implementation of Pbis and make it better using several sources of data, student outcome data, fidelity of implementation, that we're implementing the framework as it's intended to be implemented. And last but not least, that stakeholder perception feedback. What are our staff, our students, and our families, community partners, what is their feedback to understanding and awareness, and also how to make implementation better, simply put. So we usually do that through our structured problem solving process. So we'll revisit that in skills, and then we'll come back to it with the tool today for how we look at some of those skills and match you to any resources that might help. But this continuous improvement piece is really built on that part of the team functioning, how we function as a team and how we use data within our ongoing teaming activities. And our tier 1 training focuses on that a lot. So sometimes it's revisiting those pieces of tier 1 training. Sometimes it's diving into a little bit more examples, for example, problem solving. So we'll talk about that one in just a little bit. And then again, if you think of other results, that's mainly my cheat sheet prompt to let you know that this list is not exhaustive. It's some of the primary ones or ones that come to mind easily. You may think of others though, and you're welcome to chat them in the chat box as you think of things like continuous improvement. So one that is not listed here, but I know is very common and very popular at the district and school level, is if we've added in another initiative or curricula or any type of behavioral initiative mental health education, curricula, that kind of thing. Seeing that we're truly supporting our staff in implementing those things and that it's making an impact in those outcomes we wanted to see impacted by that additional thing we're adding in. So if it's school climate initiative, we're looking at school climate data, that kind of thing. And then last is that general, that third that kind of overlaps throughout, but that we're just doing that ongoing coaching every day in the hallway, 5-minute questions. We used to call this 5-minute consultation when I was in grad school, but like where you're just answering questions. So promoting understanding in your everyday conversations you have with different stakeholders, building awareness, listening. Active listening is a big communication strategy we use in leadership and facilitated leadership, and making sure we're hearing what the concerns are of stakeholders that are valid concerns and we need to take back to address their improvements, and using strategies like surveys or quick Padlets, quick other types of technology to get some feedback. And then I think right now, ever since COVID, the biggest challenge has been in traditional, again, coaching. We're talking about coaching today. Coaching is part of professional development. Tons of research that one-stop shop training is not really successful. But if we add one-stop shop training or explicit instruction, and then that ongoing support through everyday work on a school campus for this particular purpose, we see implementation skyrocket in terms of success. So we're really trying to look at that piece of the team and what it looks like to maintain that ongoing coaching support after initial and ongoing trainings. So why is that role important? Like, why do we take some time to review that role? We know it's linked to some things that we all want. We called this Road to Model School today. To be a model school or state recognized school, we have to implement with fidelity. We also want to implement with fidelity to get the desired student outcomes we want. So we know teams that serve that coaching role and function better as a team have better implementation of PBIS and MTSS in general. And then as we go down, we see also better communication, collaboration. There's more that's also associated with school climate. We see better skills that goes to implementation fidelity. We see people more comfortable with the things we've taught them with our PBS implementation, regular instruction of expectations, teaching of rules aligned to expectations. We see lots of examples, and it's ingrained in our campuses. So when we say fluent, just like we build reading fluency, we build fluency with doing those core elements of our PBS framework. So as that coaching role gets stronger and stronger, we see more of that happen. And those of you who've been on walkthroughs, or if you're a school where we come to do a walkthrough or your DC's done a walkthrough, that's why we ask some of the questions you do. If you're fluent in doing this well, students should be able to tell us the expectations, staff should be able to tell us the expectations. We should know about the team, for example, on campus, and some of the things that we explore in the classroom and then school-wide is to observe that fluency and skill acquisition. And then I mentioned the generalization, or when we master some of these pieces of implementation, it happens across stakeholders. Then we know our teams that do this well, coach well across their systems, even without ongoing explicit training, they do really well with maintenance and sustainability because they constantly keep the mission and vision of PBS at the forefront. They support that mission and vision with the things that people need to implement that vision. And then they're always asking for feedback for that continuous improvement. So if that was the role of the coaching team that we know leads to some of those successful outcomes, we're going to transition to kind of the approach of building that capacity. If we know what the role is that leads to success, and then if we talked a little bit about why we want that role, it leads to some of those outcomes we just went on the last slide. We are set up for a state coaching model with this cascade across state, district, school, stakeholders back up. So it's bi-directional, keeping the idea of good communication and technical assistance training is always bi-directional. So we are a state TA team. We provide training and technical assistance, that ongoing coaching to that district level and schools within that district level. Your DCs, and I know there's some on here, do a nice job of that. DCs provide support and ongoing coaching to you as the school teams to serve that role we just discussed, and school contacts that are with us today. You do that with your entire team, and there may only be one of you on today. With that entire coaching team, you serve that role across your campuses, with all those stakeholders being part of that cascade that give information back. So keeping in mind those buckets you see on the left of leading, communicating, continuous improvement, and coaching and supporting. That's kind of what it looks like across that state level of cascade and supports. and how we provide that support across the different levels. So that brings into being one specific example of this bidirectional feedback in that role. One thing we have districts establish when we initially train and then helps the district coordinator to serve that role a lot is an initial contact. So when that whole team is trained for PBS, we have you identify a point of contact. Some of you listening today may be that point of contact. The purpose and that point of contact may also rotate. I know some of my schools have a couple that they rotate between to come to either district supported meetings or just be that primary contact for communication around things like evaluation, new resources, that kind of thing. So someone on the team as a communication piece to serve that coaching role from the district to the schools is identified. And then that list is maintained by the district coordinator. Just like we maintain the list of our district contacts. Sometimes it's one, sometimes it's two, sometimes it's three, with that district leadership team as our main point of communication. So you see a little bit to that one specific part of the team is to help communication, also to help evaluation procedures. So they are usually the one that has the privilege of that login for the school, that they enter some data. That task is essential because it's going to give us that data we need to do some of the problem solving role of the team that we'll talk about. And then the communication for resources, building coaching capacity of the team, and also that evaluation data is also what helps us with continuous improvement. So it's a pretty essential role. And I know we depend on it a lot, just like we depend on our district coordinators to have that cascade of coaching supports. And we're in Florida, so we usually have a lot of turnover happening, unfortunately. Okay, so role we talked about, critical role for success. If we know the team role, we talked a little bit of the layout of our state across school level. Now what's on the screen is we're going to dive a little bit into skills. And this is our coaching framework, mainly driven from the literature around systems coaching. So we are very familiar with instructional coaching, right? That one-on-one coaching that happens. Systems coaching is fairly new in the last decade or so, but gathering some research about what it means for a team to coach school improvement of a system or district improvement for schools and districts. And what is represented that we will kind of unpack a little bit to get to the tool, because the tool is going to be organized around these domains, is there's layers to it. So if you, I know my kids are growing up fast, so I hardly remember it, but if you remember those of you who have children, the little toy that stacks the rings around the pole, and you're looking down at that little ring toy, that's kind of what this visual is. So you start with that foundational level of a team to do that role we described at the beginning, that foundational piece of I've got to know how to do problem solving. I've got to know how to facilitate that, use data within those problem solving steps. And we'll go through that a little bit more in a second. The second layer on top of that is that facilitated leadership. I use good interpersonal communication and transparency, mission, vision, communication. With the other part of that being I address ongoing PD needs. So for us, that's with districts like district coordinators, that's with their schools. With schools, that's with your staff and community and other stakeholders on campus for PD needs. And on the top is the kind of, what do I need to know to be able to do this? That content knowledge to implement a multi-tiered system of support for behavior and emotional well-being. So if that's what the skill set are, what we're going to do, we're going to introduce the tool first. So to this point, I've given you a lot of information about the role and what I would need to do that role. This tool that we're introducing is our Tier 1 coaching survey for school teams. It's organized by that visual I just went through. So when you see this visual, it's got a little bit of an overwhelming flair. So we're going to try to unpack it a little bit. And then Brooke's going to do a great job wrapping us up with how it's going to be used or benefit you that are listening or why you came today. So it's to assess team coaching capacity to serve that role we described at the beginning. So if we want those outcomes by our team serving that role, this is a tool that would operationalize that a little bit for you and give you an assessment across those three domains of skills, or the ring toy, I just called it. And when we look at those various skills, allow us to determine what are we really strong as a team as a whole, or what are some areas that we might need to prioritize to work on. And that could be as simple as using some of the tools Rubric, and we'll go through that to perfect a team function or skill. Or it could be diving into another resource to build our own capacity as a school team. So essentially our purpose here is to help teams assess where are we with coaching capacity, as it was just described with that framework. And if we want to keep areas of strength, we could highlight those. We can also identify areas of need. You have a copy of the survey, because that is very small on the screen, but you're going to have a copy of it in the live binder link. And Betsy, if you don't mind chatting that link in there for me, I know you probably already did already, but that would be awesome. Along with the PowerPoint from today, you'll have a copy of the actual survey. You'll also have a copy of the scoring Excel tool that we offer you to use when you use this with school teams. Also, you have the live binder link. So there's no excuse for not accessing the survey, because we're giving it to you as a handout. And then it's also at that live binder link right there for you in the PDF. And then we almost didn't include this, but we did want you to know, where did this survey come from? And it was a long road. So there was a small work group that spent 5 years developing this tool. We actually developed a version of it and then perfected it, that continuous improvement part, right? So we took a initial version, we used that, got some stakeholder in phase 1. It was based off what we know from systems coaching literature and the domains of skills teams need to be successful. We kept perfecting that over the next couple of years. So this version, that initial version, has changed and been revised to the current version. Based on what you see in phase 2 and across districts school level, we had stakeholder feedback from district coordinators, from coaching, district coaches and school coaches, and you can see the representation of who was involved in that round. And that was really helpful as far as clarity of items, what it was asking, and in trying to condense and limit items in the different domains. Last but not least, we did a last round with some external to the state of Florida. So we had some people from our national network give us some feedback in terms, again, of item clarity and the domains. And I didn't mention us, but you know I love our project staff. They were a part of that kind of across the 3 phases, but we use a lot of our internal expertise, including our evaluation team, who is amazing, just to give some review to items. Okay, so that's how we got here, but we are at the final product that we're going to be sharing with you, and then talking about the use. And I mentioned it got revised. So it ended up with 28 items. You do have some option to not complete all those items if you don't want. I'll talk through that a little bit, but it was reduced from originally 33. We have a 4-point scale. And again, those items, you'll see that pretty clearly when you look at the tool. They're divided across the 3 coaching domains. So the ring toy. So problem solving was the foundation, facilitate leadership, and MTSS content knowledge. That's what's going to be organized and then scored to help give you some ways to break down either strengths or areas of need. So it just started spring 2022 to have that finalized version and used publicly. And we put it back on our website with that version. We actually did have the older version on before that date with a little bit of gap in time there. So scoring criteria, there was a lot in that review process that went into this, but what it's ended with as far as all that feedback we gathered across levels was the scoring criteria. We went with the implementation science stages. And so when you are scoring, and you are scoring this as a whole team, not as one single person, the whole team is agreeing to as a interdependent group. Where are we with this particular item within each domain, to use those 0 through 3 that you see on the screen. And just so you know where we got that language, that was similar to the SAM. If you're familiar with the SAM, the self-assessment of multi-tiered system of support in our state, or also just nationally, the implementation. Okay, so who's intended to be used? And I think that's everyone on. I didn't get a lot of you in the first question to answer, but a couple that did, this would apply. We're looking at schools who've been trying to do this at least a minimum of a year. So I know one person had chat in the chat box. They've just been done over the summer. So it's a little bit early to use it now for you, but at the end of this year and going into the summer and next year would be a perfect time for your team. You've been implementing or trained and implemented about a year. I already mentioned the how we're completing as a team versus individual rankings. You have some flexibility with the when and how. So we're both going to be trying to be good about offering you your options. So for district planning features, we would recommend you do it at the beginning or end of school year, or we do a yearly planning with our district coordinators for the district team, doing that about 1 to 2 months prior to that, if you are a district coordinator or district team member listening. After that, you do it yearly every 2 years. That's kind of our recommendation for you in use of the tool. I already mentioned this, but just to reiterate again, you can use specific sections of the tool if you wanted to, or do the entire survey. We only recommend that you do the entire survey if possible initially that first time, especially if you're using it at a district level for all schools. For school level, just consider, we are looking at measuring your capacity as a team. So only use this tool if that's something your team is looking for. I know that sounds self-explanatory, but make sure your administrators are on board. They're wanting to get some idea of where are we as a team. This is also really helpful if we're not seeing the outcomes we want, but when we're doing like our BOQ and our fidelity measure, we think we're having high fidelity. This could be a tool to dig in a little bit more to coaching supports or strategies that might help us get those outcomes where we want them to be. And I think that's it. The last note there was about team turnover. If you have had significant team turnover, which I know happens in a lot of our schools, sadly, this is not a tool you want to dive into yet. I would encourage you more just to think back through some of the tier 1 training materials or coaching through some of those tier 1 elements. So we're going to go to the elements or the domains. This is the rings on the ring toy or the little visual that you saw. So this is that foundational element for effective coaching problem solving. That's going to be the first domain of the survey. So when we say we know we need skills to do problem solving, things like we do problem solving with fidelity. We do all 4 steps as intended. We don't skip steps. We use data to make sure this is data driven in the steps. And that includes both outcome data and implementation or fidelity data. So we have to have both types access of that data to do this well. So when we think about that as a foundation and keeping in mind, not everybody on your team has to be experts in problem solving, but we need to have some team members that feel comfortable to facilitate that, same at the district level. And then build on the knowledge of others as far as participating in that problem solving. So if that's the domain, this is what it looks like in the survey. There's the problem solving facilitation. You'll see it always highlighted that way when a domain is starting. Underneath the domain, you will always see a resource, and those resource linked, there'll be live links for you, are links to help build your knowledge or apply this concept or domain area. So for example, if you want more information on those domains than we're able to give you today, those links will help. There's various examples provided throughout the items. You'll see now in item 1 through, we skipped over to 11. There's 11 items in here. We couldn't put them all on the screen for you. But you'll see here's an example of when we say you have to have the skill to do problem solving, the first item in here is we adhere to all 4 steps of the problem solving process. So what we may find in discussing this, just using the rubric on that first one as an example, is maybe we do problem ID really well, but maybe we are guilty of jumping to intervention planning without really analyzing why the problem's happening. That's very common. It's a common thing that starts to happen in our teams. We could use the rubric as we go across here to know we're only adhering to 3 of the 4 steps. And then we might need to pay attention or look at that second step that we've been skipping. You'll notice also each item, some of the items like example 2 here have a lot of prompts for you, example questions or prompts to go with the rubric, or might have additional resources like 11 underneath. So I'm gonna go, sorry, I didn't do my red as I talked to you. I'm so sorry, I'm always bad about that. And there's more. Okay, so the next domain is that we're using, remember that communicate and lead, the idea that coaching systems is based on relationships. So if we're doing good leadership as a team, we're using good interpersonal communication strategies and also attending to professional development needs. So what does that look like under each? Interpersonal communication. I know I'm trained in counseling, and it always hits me that this is very consistent with counseling training. The same is true of good leadership in teams and schools and systems change. So it means we use things like we listen actively to hear what concerns are, to hear for understanding of things that we've communicated. We listen for perspectives and use empathy when we're hearing those perspectives. It's why we train you in multidisciplinary teams and multidisciplinary perspectives. So that we can build that empathy and understanding in our communication. We use good teaming. We want everyone to participate on the team. We don't want it to be a one-man show or one-woman show. We want it to be everyone's collaborating and participating, and that we come to decisions by consensus, not just by top-down or told those decisions. We also use good data to support why we make certain decisions. That's part of that transparent communication. Last is family and community engagement, and not last, but part of that interpersonal communication. We use that same strategy of good communication with that stakeholder group and make sure we're keeping the active engagement and bi-directional communication. Briefly on professional development, this comes down to the attending to ongoing training needs. And I know I've heard the phrase bite-sized PD more than I can count lately. I've heard that my whole career in education, but how do we address PD needs in whatever format we have available to us, doing those short chunks of information, making sure we're modeling and practicing those skills that builds fluency with them. So if it's teaching behaviors or reinforcing behaviors, for example, we're modeling that as part of training, we're coaching it, we're giving examples. And then whenever we provide feedback, so whether that's feedback through reinforcements, or performance feedback, such as I love how Mrs. So-and-so's class was practicing the school-wide expectations today. We're using that always in our system to reinforce implementation of the system. For technical assistants or DCs, I think you're planning your ongoing coaching meetings, or for DCs, when we reach out to you to get information to plan DC needs, or with district teams, what are some of those needs that we need to address our content for? So there is the domain there as far as professional development. Facilitated leadership, those two caveats, effective communication and collaborative teaming, all are included in these items in this particular domain. Same thing, pay attention to those examples and non-examples or extra prompts that are provided there. For example, there's some of the effective language I mentioned. Those will always help you. And that was a really big part of the feedback throughout the years, is that will help you with the rubric. So it kind of makes sense of the skill with the rubric and how you're answering with what you might do differently. And then we always include those strategies as part of that. So it may be examples, it may be questions or prompts like the last one, or it may be different strategies for you. So for example, if we don't feel like we have efficient meetings in the last one, we might use a meeting agenda, a more structured meeting agenda, or meeting checklist. And those are resources that we offer you pretty easily. And Brooke will kind of illustrate that in just a second. So last one is a tiny bit different. It's our third layer, third ring, and that's just content area expertise. So what do I need to know? And again, I just keep reinforcing, not everybody has to be experts in everything, but that we have the expertise across all our team members on our team. That multi-tiered system of Pbis. So maybe we've had tier 1 training, but haven't gone through tier 2 systems, and we're building that. Principles of behavior. We know everything's going to be function-based. When we're using data for problem solving, we have to understand function and how function can drive what we do next. Using data, collecting that data, having access to data, and then using it to make decisions through that problem solving process. And then I keep mentioning use of outcome and fidelity data, but do we have knowledge of what those fidelity data sources are, like our tier 1 benchmarks of quality, or tier 2 and 3 tiered fidelity inventory, or at your level, it might be things like in our school, are we tracking fidelity of our reinforcement system or a teaching across the campus? So a little bit different than the other items. So we're not going to stride after this with the visual, because the items are spread out for this one across the different domains. So for example, item 5, if you look at the bottom there's all our content knowledge items. Item 5 is on evidence-based interventions. That's an area of content knowledge, but it's in our problem solving domain. So if I'm going to plan something for intervention, I have to have knowledge of those evidence-based practices. So that particular content knowledge item is in problem solving. So it's a little bit different, although Brooke will show you the scoring tool, and it does nicely aggregate these items for you in knowledge. So you can use that data as a whole. This is probably the biggest area or layer of coaching where people seek out others, whether that's a school team seeking out the district coordinator, or district coordinator maybe seeking out some additional resources or training from us. It's definitely one that is probably the biggest for quick access to resources, building knowledge through trainings, that kind of thing. All right, Brooke, I think I've done pretty good. Giving you about 20 minutes to get through. She's going to walk you through the use of that tool. I hope I was clear on kind of the role, what leads you to success, to implementing with fidelity and some of those outcomes, the tool, how it's set up, aligned to what we know about good coaching skills. She's going to dive into how this can help you out. So Brooke, take it away.
Thank you, Kat. Yes, I am going to try and model for you how you can take the results from your coaching survey and turn that into action steps. And I want to start off just by kind of using that survey data and where that fits within the idea of problem solving. When we're considering our student outcomes and we're not getting the results that we are intending and that we're expecting, we start to analyze, why is that happening? And what you've been trained to do and what we look at is, are we doing the strategies as we intended, or our fidelity? So one of the tools that you typically would use is your benchmark. So quality, the pick, maybe you're looking at those specific strategies around tier 1, like Kat said. And so this is also where we can look in another way to look at fidelity of, do we even have membership represented on our team and all those skills represented on our team in order to coach up that PBIS implementation plan as intended. So that's kind of where this coaching skills survey can fit. It can fit in that problem analysis piece, where you can start to identify some barriers to that team's, how that team might be functioning in order to ensure that that PBIS implementation plan is being carried out with fidelity. Again, it's meant to be this non-evaluative piece, so that you have that accuracy in your reporting and it gives you the feedback that you want it to give you. Go ahead, Kat. So then the next step, once you get the survey, is how are we going to use it? How do we turn those results into action steps? And what I'm going to kind of walk you through a little bit here is we're going to talk about action planning both at the district level as well as at the school level. Again, it's designed to be evaluating the school level coaching teams skill set. And so we'll start with that in how you can take the responses, look at the resources within the survey and turn those into action steps. So really looking at that school team's capacity, the ability to ongoing monitoring of those PBIS practices, and maybe even prioritize what are the coaching needs that we need to do either within internally or reach out to district for support. Maybe I need to work with my district coordinator to build capacity, or maybe there's a systemic barrier that's happening across the district, maybe with our data system, that we don't have the capacity in order to engage in that problem solving effectively, and what have you. And so again, if we're utilizing this, for those of you who are district coordinators on the call, if you do use this in preparation for your yearly planning meeting, or get that district-wide, survey out to all the schools and they're able to aggregate that data for you, we can give you some insight into, are there common domains where schools are struggling, and even peel back that onion a little bit more and look maybe at the items and say, we've got 50% or more of our PBIS implementing school teams that are struggling within the area of problem solving due to maybe some gaps in our data system, for example. So it can help drive that strategic planning, help give us those targeted supports. I think Kat had mentioned, if you're getting ready to prepare for perhaps a retraining and we have a booster, but we start looking at some of those fidelity elements on the benchmarks of quality, and we're struggling to identify, what critical elements we want to look at, we can also perhaps use this survey tool to give us some more insight into what are some of those areas where we want to enhance those skills of that school team as well. Go ahead. All right, so this is just going to give you a quick little snapshot of what the Excel tool looks like. On the next slide, I'm going to explain what each part looks at. But when you first open the Excel tool, you have the questions with the rubric. You have a drop-down menu for completing. It gives you a little summary page, and then it gives you the graphic of how that data then is aggregated across the domain. Go ahead, next slide, Kat. All right, so here's that first, here's that first piece of the Excel tool. When you look at it, it has the rubric for your school team to then work on this together, come to consensus on what your feel your criteria is, whether you're just emerging in some areas, maybe you haven't started for different items, etc. And then you can select your school scores. Then in the next slide, once all your answers are in there, it gives you a quick little summary. This is just a really nice way to look at across the domains, how many responses were considered not started, just emerging, operationalized, etc. This is also a quick little self-check to make sure you didn't skip any of the responses. But then the last image that you see is really how it graphs it for you, and you can kind of see where are you having perhaps some areas that you are struggling with or areas that you're optimizing. We're doing really good. We've got some strength within our areas of some of our collaborative teaming processes, and our communication skills look pretty strong here, but we're really needing areas to enhance because we're just emerging or have not started in our family and community engagement piece, or maybe our MTSS, that content knowledge area, is an area that we've just started to emerge. And so those can become those areas of need, and then kind of look back and perhaps turn those into action steps. So on this next slide, when we use that survey data to problem solve, we really want to look at what does this coaching framework look like within our team? Where are we optimizing? Where are we doing well? But what areas are we just starting or emerging? And so this isn't just an example. This is a school level team looking at their results here and taking the responses from their problem solving facilitation. Maybe they noticed, okay, let's dig a little bit deeper into those items where we had not started or just emerging in the problem solving area. And we see that for item number 4, if you look at the way the questions are set out, and I'm going to reference my coaching survey that I have in front of me, because unfortunately I don't have the whole tool memorized and I don't have everything memorized and what it says, but for question 4, it talks about drilling down and accessing data in addition to those big 5 reports that we sometimes call the location, time of day, by problem behavior, and what other data sources might you use to help with problem identification. And it gives examples there, such as out of school suspension, attendance, minor referrals. It gives additional qualitative examples, climate surveys, teacher reports, family and student focus groups. So this school team could just decide, okay, we were not started in that area. We're only reviewing our big 5. So our first action item is that we're going to try and identify at least one more data source moving forward in order to help with problem identification. The next example is with regard to that facilitated leadership support. That same idea here is that we can look at those areas where we're emerging or developing and kind of look into the item on the coaching skills survey. And the items are set up like Kat already modeled for you, where either the rubric itself can turn into that action item, or it can link you to the resources. So again, in this case, they looked at items related to that facilitated leadership and support and determined that, okay, we have a team meeting, we are meeting together as a team, but we don't necessarily have a very structured meeting. We're not following a set agenda. We're not making sure that our meetings are really running as effectively as they should. So we're going to turn, based on that rubric, that into an action item, and we're going to create a team meeting checklist, or take it a step further, click to the resources within the tool itself, and you can access some of our sample agendas and team meeting checklists within our school-based coaching. And lastly, the last piece there is, again, that content knowledge. And in that item, it talks about having the appropriate personnel or staff available to help with evidence-based interventions or help with selection of those skills and intervention support. So maybe this school was, just emerging in that area, because they sometimes have these specialists in their Pbis teaming meetings, but not always, due to the fact that they might be itinerant, things of that nature. So now they're going to be more intentional about making sure that they're inviting or collaborating with these personnel. So like I mentioned, a lot of the action items can be derived from how that rubric is set up, and it's very concrete, from not started to that emerging to operationalizing and optimizing. So those can easily turn into those scaffolded steps to improve that coaching framework, coaching structure for your school team. Go ahead, Kat. I think you might have missed a few little animations. That's okay. One more. All right, and this next example kind of walks us then through that same school team looking at their data, but then how might some of those items that they may not have the skill sets at all, maybe they don't have the resources, or they're not sure what to do. This is where we can start to reach out to district for support and really engage with our district coordinator to help us address those gaps. So I use the example here in the problem solving facilitation area. Question 5 talks about being able to identify your evidence-based interventions to enhance your Tier 1 implementation practices. Is there a district resource map that outlines what resources are available across the different campuses and what have you? So that might be a way that maybe the school doesn't know about this and they can just seek a district coordinator for feedback on that, and district coordinator can connect them with those resources. Or again, if you're a district coordinator and you're seeing that gap come up repeatedly through request, or we do have the capability now to kind of aggregate some reports for districts. If that's an item where we see big gaps, we can always bring that back to district leadership team, as this is a need. We have schools that as they're trying to improve their coaching and support facilitating problem solving and connecting with evidence-based interventions, they have a gap here, and how can we support that? Again, in that area of that facilitated leadership and support, maybe in the area of stakeholder engagement, they haven't been able to start anything beyond maybe that initial survey. Maybe they can do a Google survey or do some communication preferences survey with their stakeholders, but they don't know how to have that really engaged conversation or focus groups with their stakeholders. And that requires additional training. So it's not as simple as looking at this rubric and saying, okay, we can, just pick up and start a focus group, because we don't even have the skill sets to do that. We need to engage with district leadership or outside and get that skill set under our belt so that we can do it. And so that might be another area where they can engage with the district leaders or district coordinators. And the last piece, and I purposely kind of piggybacked on the item from the school level, where number 18 around content knowledge experts and having them be part of that Pbis Tier 1 team or help to support the behavioral needs of the students. There may be barriers within districts, especially with certain resource personnel, that they're only available certain times a day, or maybe it's not part of their job roles and responsibilities. So that's another area where a school may have an action item of, we want to include this person in our Tier 1 team, but there's a barrier at the district level that we need to work with our district coordinator to help address that gaps. And so how can we increase that collaboration with some of those content area knowledge experts? So those are just kind of 2 ways, real concrete at the school level, turning things within the rubric into those action steps, but then also looking at it as ways to say, okay, I'm looking at this rubric, I'm looking at these resources. We don't even have the skill sets to turn it into an action step. I need to engage with my district coordinator, or we need to work with our district on removing barriers to this coaching skill. All right. So again, if we're utilizing it and thinking about it at that district level, for those of you who are district coordinators and using it as part of that yearly implementation planning process, depending on the size of your district and depending on that capacity, we do have some ways to aggregate some of your report to give you that breakdown across those domains for coaching, so you can give that feedback to your district leadership team across those areas. Because while this would directly impact perhaps those implementation functions that you see at the bottom in terms of the coaching needs of your schools that you support, it also could lend itself to some of those executive, those things around policy, the workforce capacity, things like that. So Kat, there's a little bit of animation on this slide, if you would add to that. So again, if we see across those domains, like I've already mentioned, barriers with problem solving facilitation, because we don't have data systems that are adequate to support that problem solving piece. That might be an area that the district leadership team can have an impact on in terms of evaluation, or in terms of how they're even providing training as staff are joining school level teams and what have you. So you can see how each of those different areas of the coaching domain can lend itself to the leadership team's function. Go ahead. So I'm just going to wrap up with this as kind of a little bit of a laundry list, but within all of these resources, they're all of our coaching support resources that align with that coaching skills survey and can be used again as a resource to support those action steps at both the school as well as that district coordinator level. Yes, and all are hyperlinked in that handout for you. Some of you may have a lot of familiarity with some of these parts of our website. But I think that is it for me. We have just a couple minutes before we are all out of time. So we will answer any questions that you might have regarding the survey or its use.
And I believe, Betsy, do you want to pull up the ending poll for us while we're hanging out to ask any questions, concerns, resources?
Absolutely. So I will put the poll up. And if you wouldn't mind just giving us a little bit of feedback about today's training, it's very helpful for us. So that should be on your screen now. And if you want to ask any questions in the chat while that's going on, that would be great.